Hello and welcome to the fourth edition of Crosby's 9 podcast. How is everybody today? Good. I hope you are ready to listen and learn, practice and learn, repeat and learn, vocabulary, pronunciation, of course, phrasal verbs, spelling sometimes. Every time I do a podcast, I think of you out there, you podcast listeners who are learning English, and all of the facets, all of the parts of English that you need to keep in mind when you learn. Spelling, listening, speaking, writing. But since this is a podcast, of course, most of what you are practicing is listening and speaking. Those of you who haven't heard my first couple podcasts, go back and listen. I think you will be able to take advantage of some of the advice I give. Advice. Hey, by the way, what does advice mean? What is advice? Is it the same as the verb to advise? I should say, is it spelled the same way as the verb to advise? No, it's not, is it? The noun advice is spelled A-D-V-I-C-E. A-D-V-I-C-E. The verb is A-D-V-I-S-E. Can you hear a difference in the way it's pronounced? The noun advice, and the verb advise. I really work on pronunciation with my listeners, I should say with my students, but hopefully now with you, my new listeners, my Crosby 9 podcast listeners, I want you to imitate me with these words. I want you to imitate these words like advise. We work on the Z or the Z, as they say in Britain. I remember as a kid growing up, as a teenager, English pop music was my favorite. Groups like the Jam and the Smiths. And really that's where my first contact with British English was, with a lot of the English songwriters and British pop music. And the Jam had a song called Strange Town, where Paul Weller, the lead guitarist, the leader of the group, usually the lyricist and the lead vocalist, sang about London being a strange town because he was from Woking, England, and London was strange to him. So when he got to London, when he arrived, or when he got to London, he bought an A to Z guidebook. And I thought, what in the world is an A to Z guidebook? Well, in the United States, we would say A to Z guidebook, but we probably wouldn't say that either because, well, A to Z guidebooks don't exist in the United States. But going back to the story and talking about listening and the verb to advise, it sounds like a Z, but it's spelled A-D-V-I-S-E, to advise, and the noun is advice. So going back to the original first, second, third podcasts, the first ones that I have published, if you listen to those, it will give you a good idea of my philosophy in helping you learn English. It's difficult to cover all aspects of learning English in a podcast, but I try to, by helping you listen and speak, imitate, practice, and really the trick is also not having any fear. I do say that fear is a big component, a big obstacle in learning English, in learning any language, I imagine. Fear is horrible in learning anything. It's an impediment to advancing. It is a barrier. It is an obstacle. So forget about fear and practice. Don't worry about what other people think. Don't worry about what other people say. Don't worry if you make a mistake. Hopefully you will be in a setting or an environment where people will correct you. Now, I want to also talk today about the verb to be. Why? Because it's the foundation of the language. The simple verb to be. I shouldn't say simple. It's not a simple verb. It's a complex verb. It's an irregular verb, which seems to be the case with many languages, I suspect. I studied French a little bit growing up. Of course, I studied Spanish as well, and I immediately learned that, yes, just like in English, Spanish and French have irregular verbs. In fact, the verb to be in Spanish is irregular, and it is also irregular in French. Now, it's kind of ironic that the most basic verb in English is irregular. Shouldn't it be easier? Well, it's not, unfortunately, listeners, and that means that you have to learn it. And you have to learn it backwards and forwards. What do I mean by that? Well, since the verb to be is such an important part of the language, I have found in my many, many years of teaching English, in my years of communicating and working in communication in the English language, so many people who learn English as a foreign language still don't have a firm grasp or a firm understanding, a strong, solid understanding of the verb to be. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they can't conjugate it. They can't conjugate it quickly. So instead of wasting your time, we don't want to waste our time when we learn English. We want to be efficient. Take extra time to really learn the verb to be so that you can be agile with it, so that you can be quick when you use it. In 3 basic formats. Now let's just focus on the present simple. As you know, we conjugate the verb to be. I am, you are, she is, or he is, or it is. We are, you are, they are. Great. Affirmative, right? We have the present simple, the verb to be, affirming, affirmative. The question, the interrogative. Am I? Are you? Is she? Is he? Is he? Is she? Is it? Are you? Are we, I should say, the plural, the third person plural. Are we? Are you? Are they? Got it? Good. Of course you know that. And then, of course, the negative. I'm not. All right? You aren't, or you aren't. He isn't, she isn't. We aren't, you aren't, they aren't. Now, we also have to practice the negative in the interrogative, right? Aren't you? Isn't he? Are we? Are you? Are they? Now, just looking at the verb to be in the present simple. Listeners, you need to be able to conjugate this verb backwards and forwards quickly without really thinking. Well, isn't he here today? Why isn't he here? Aren't we going? Aren't we going early today? You aren't from Colombia, are you? Aren't you from Colombia? Aren't you from Colombia? Isn't he late? Aren't they interesting? These types of things need to happen quickly. So my advice to you listeners is to take the extra time to focus on the verb to be. Believe me, I'm going to help you with this because it's a waste of time if you don't fully understand the verb to be, fully know how to be agile with the verb, to be able to use the verb to be quickly without thinking in the affirmative, in the interrogative, in the negative interrogative, quickly, bing, bang, boom, in the present tense. And of course in the past tense and in the present perfect tense and conditional tenses. But if you're just a beginner, and I would really suggest everyone to practice the verb to be in the present simple. Try it. How agile are you? How quickly, or how easily, I should say, can you use the verb to be? Believe me, I'm not kidding. I have been doing this for a long time. And if you take the extra time today, you won't have to go back in 2 or 3 or 4 years and review the verb to be. It is the foundation of the English language. And it really is worth taking advantage of learning it right the first time. So that's it. That is our 4th edition of today's Crosby's 9 podcast. Thanks for listening. I hope you are taking advantage of these podcasts and learning a lot. We will see you soon. Goodbye.